We might have some intro music.
Okay.
But we might not.
Could it be a really hard metal riff? Because no Warhammer podcasts have that.
I think if it's going to be anything, it should be us doing an a cappella version of the Dune theme. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, see, there it is. There's the metal theme.
Well, it's Toto, isn't it?
And Brian Eno. Which I didn't realise was involved.
Oh, incredible. Well, he did the prophecy theme. He did that bit.
Is that just that?
The rest is Toto, and then Brian Eno did the prophecy theme.
All right.
Yeah.
But that was cool.
I've seen this film. I've seen this film a few times.
So, this is the GW Films podcast. In this show, we take a look at films that have formed the backdrop or influenced or been part of the sort of, I don't know, the texture and the sources of inspiration for Games Workshop games. So whether that's Warhammer or 40k or Age of Sigmar or Blood Bowl or any of the other games that have been produced over the years. But we're trying to find evidence where we can that these films are related to these franchises, to the IP. So creators have mentioned, I drew some inspiration from that, or I was reading that in the background and it really informed my ideas, that kind of stuff. But we're going to explore whether or not we think we can see those traces. Do those elements make their way through into the stories and the games that we love? So I'm Jordan Sorcery, and you are...
I'm Rob. I've been mentioned a couple of times on your videos, but always as a mysterious element from the past. And that's how I shall remain.
Mysterious element from the past, but not the present? We're talking through time.
We're talking through time. I'm currently on my floor in my room in Timpley with the Battlemaster's mat at my feet. I'm sticking to it because it was a very sticky mat. Hero Quest's on the side over there. And you've brought around some Mech Warrior CCG cards, and we don't know what we're doing with them.
This, of course, is because we are old friends. We've been playing Warhammer and plenty of other games for literally decades together, right? But through time and space. Yeah, we're going to be talking about a very influential film. Now, arguably, the book and the book series are more related to 40k, but because this is a podcast about films and how they relate to GW games, we're going to bend our own rules. In the very first episode,
amazing. Brilliant.
We're going to be talking about David Lynch's Dune from 1984, and this is related to 40k, and I can tell you who told me about that, and it's Rick Priestley. I was talking to him
that's a good one. I think if you're going to ask someone, could you name a film related to 40k? I think Rick Priestley is the one you want, really. I mean...
Yeah, and I was very conscious as I said that it sounded like I was doing just like, I'm going to do a bit of name drop. Let's start with a big name drop.
But you want the person whose name is on the front of the book to tell you what they were influenced by. That's 101.
So let me tell you what Rick Priestley says about Dune and why it's relevant to 40k. So he said, I read the original book as a teenager and would go on to read all the sequels. Dune has that same sense of deep time that 40k has. And this comes across in those extracts from historical and religious sources that Herbert uses as headers for individual chapters. I did a similar thing with the extracts of filler text in Rogue Trader and subsequently in the various versions of 40k, i.e. snippets of text used to fill gaps when the pages were assembled. One such filler piece was later expanded into the whole background for the Horus Heresy, which just goes to show you. Dune also has that feel of a medieval universe that I would utilize in Rogue Trader, and a contained rationale for space travel in Spice and Fold Space. Compare with Astronomicon and Warp Space. Not the same, but fulfilling the same functional role in the setting. So, that sounds like there's a deep connection there. But before we get into any more of the specifics and how that influence actually is felt in 40k, Rob, I think I'm right in saying I think you quite like Dune, right?
I quite like Dune.
You quite enjoy it. Yes. Do you want to tell us what the story of let's go for the Lynch movie version. What's the story?
Lynch movie version. Okay, so for the fives of people who have not either read, seen the Lynch version, seen the Villeneuve version, or seen the Sci-Fi Channel version. Dune is the story of... Well, it's difficult, actually. It's a story about a lot of things. It's a science fiction film. It's a story about... ostensively about rival houses battling for a power source, being spice in this case, which is only available on one planet, and the conflicts between those families in the face of an emperor, which we'll come back to later. However, it's also the story about powerful demagogues, powerful about the religious fervour and leaders that can lead a maybe one-time well-intentioned crusade on a very bad trajectory. It's a story really of cosmic power, of the way humanity can transcend itself through the use of the spice in order to become a better sort of version of humanity. It's also got some sandworms in it, quite a lot of sandworms, and a lot of knife fighting. It's a big question to say what Dune is about.
Well, you're making it sound like it's really big.
It's
a big story.
It is. Lynch's version is specifically the first book. He has taken the first book of the series of Dune and adapted that into a film to certain degrees of success. I am a fan of certain parts. I think some parts are ridiculous, such as the ending in which Paul Atreides brings rain to Arrakis, which would then immediately kill all the sandworms and destroy all the spice. But never mind, Lynch, you do you. But yeah, the Lynch version is very much condensed. I mean, I say condensed. I think it's only 2.5 hours, which actually in a modern day film is not much.
No.
He's taken a large book there and condensed it. By comparison, the Villeneuve pair is, I believe, 5 hours in total. And I don't think that's long enough, to be honest. I would happily watch that again. So the Lynch version is a greatest hits. It's very much a, here's the story, and we're going to race through it.
But like nuts and bolts wise, it like when you boil it down and you sort of strip back all of the larger themes and stuff, the story really is Paul Atreides, the son of a duke.
Yes.
He comes to a planet. This planet is an arid, sort of sandy desert, and there are people who live out in the desert, and there are sandworms beneath it that are huge, destructive creatures. And the politics that's at play in the sort of galactic empire leads to his entire family getting killed. He gets exiled. He learns how to become like the people who live out in the desert. Yeah. And then he conquers the world and the galaxy by using the spice, this sort of magical product of
I think I went a bit too meta, with my description. I went straight to what's the meaning of Dune. You're right. It's about a small boy taking over.
And his eyes glow blue. And his eyes glow blue.
Yeah. Cal MacLachlan. A very way too old Cal MacLachlan playing.
How old is he? How is Paul?
14, 15.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because he's definitely in his 20s.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Because a lot of complaints about the new Dune was that with Chalamet and Zendaya, they looked like a teen romance.
Right.
Yes, they're meant to be 14 and 15. They are children.
Because there's also these prophecies that Paul Atreides is the chosen one who's going to lead the people. He's going to bring balance to the Force, almost, in a way, right?
In a way, bring balance to the Force. Yeah, he's the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer planets, and this has all been set up in the background by the Inquisition. Sorry, the Bene Gesserit. But it's all this kind of, the theocracy of the films is very strong, and another sort of 40k influence, I would say.
Sure. So the Dune one, I mean, the first thing that struck me...
Dune one, yes.
The Dune one.
Dune one.
Yeah, the Lynch one.
The Lynch one.
What struck me first was it's set 10,000 years in the future, right? Or the year 10,000 or something.
No, that's the 10,000. Yes,
that's the Lynch version. But even that, I mean, it's set...
It's an unknowable future.
Sure. Yeah. I think Lynch does make it knowable by giving it a specific date around 10K.
That's not our calendar, though.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
right.
No, you're not counting from BC there. AD,
so there's no Earth in...
There's no Earth in Dune.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But in that intro, in the Lynch sort of theatrical version, it establishes it's, whatever calendar you're on, it's the year 10K. It's given a sense of future, and it's given a sense of scale, both through that and through the kind of the ships we see, the massive arrays of armies and people, that this is an enormous future. Like the scale of it. And I think that for me is like the first thing that jumps out as kind of 40K.
Oh, yeah.
Let's take an inspiration from.
It's an inhuman future. It's too big,
Mm.
which is very 40K. Lynch's universe and his world building everything's massive, as it should be. The Emperor's Palace is actually quite understated for an Emperor's Palace, but it's still huge. And one of the first scenes is one of the navigators being pushed in this huge spice tank, and everything's weird and unknowable and magic, but there is that inhumanity to it, which is 40K, because 40K humanity doesn't matter. Well, humans don't matter. Humanity matters. Humans don't matter.
Sure. That navigator, whilst we're on it, is a very unusual thing, right?
It's
like a brain in a jar, but it's an enormous, it's almost like a vat, like a huge tank.
It's a spice-grown embryo,
right?
Basically, I would say, is how I would describe it. The navigators are very loosely described. If we go to the book, and immediately I'm going to the book,
sure,
I will get away from it, but it's to come back to the Lynch version. Not much is described. This is the thing about Dune. There's very little. It doesn't say, and the Sardaukar were wearing this, and the Atreides house troopers were wearing this, and this is what the navigator looked like. It's blank, a lot of it, and it's for you to fill in. And Lynch filled it in his way, in many brilliant ways, and in many ways that resonate into 40K. Absolutely, because a navigator could look like that. Could look like a brain in a jar. It could look like almost like a 40K navigator, just a human, just as long as they're surrounded by spice gas. Lynch does an excellent job. You could see that being a John Blanche drawing.
Sure.
I think you could imagine that being a character design, which, if you look at modern Necromunda, there's a couple of things that actually scream Dune Navigator in there.
Yeah.
But I think Lynch's version is almost a rogue trader set piece come to life. Like that early court is Imperial uniforms and Adeptus Mechanicus in their proto, body bags. Do you know a little fact? Can I tell you a little fact about those?
Please do.
The navigation, the guildsmen that come in with the navigator are wearing black cloaks / like almost like coveralls. They were made of actual body bags that had been used. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What was that, like, method?
I have no idea. Costume? You'd have to ask David Lynch. I assume he's going to be on the podcast.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, though, that you make about the book. So, just full disclosure, I've never read the books, any of the Dune books. So, Frank Herbert obviously has written this enormous series of the sacred texts for many, and he's got lots of these ideas, and like you say, Lynch. I can keep referring to Lynch as Dune. He has become Dune.
David Dune.
But Lynch has taken inspiration from the words and the phrases and all the sort of things that are in the book and kind of given them life. There's a lot of similar borrowed language and ideas, maybe given life in a different way in 40K. I mean, you mentioned the navigators, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously
literally
exist.
A mutated class of human that allows deep space travel.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Exactly, yeah. And the spice gas and sort of using that. I recently read for the first time Lacrimata, which is one of the short stories in the first 40K fiction collection.
Yeah, Deathwing,
written by Storm Constantine. Incredible story, really, really good sort of gothic space horror. And that feels so Dune-y. You've got the navigator literally getting into the blister, the pod, and then you can have this Lacrimata gas sort of spilling forth and taking you into the warp in new and sort of expanding your mind.
Literal spice gas.
Right.
That's exactly what it does, yeah.
So it's flowing through into all of the different writers and authors who are working on 40K fiction.
And you got the two big ones, which are touched on in the film. If you happen to watch the TV edit of Lynch's version, I do not recommend it. However, it is available on DVD, and it adds a 30-minute exposition sequence at the beginning using the storyboards drawn by Lynch's team to sort of go, and this is who the Atreides are, and this is who the Harkonnens are. But it does touch on the Butlerian Jihad, which is an essential part of Dune and 40K, which is the idea that the AI and central into computer intelligence is an abomination in the eyes of God and must be destroyed and not used, and no computer can be created without the mind of a human, which is the Adeptus Mechanicus, which is Warhammer 40,000. The reason you have servitors everywhere is because there still needs to be a human element to everything mechanical. That is fully both Dune and 40K to its core, because you need a reason for people to be hitting each other with swords, despite the fact there's laser weaponry. Yeah. And again, both Dune and 40k have that. Lynch's Dune actually leans a little bit away from that in the warfare. It's very traditional laser guns. They're all pointing guns at each other, and they forgot to add sound effects to some of them, so it just looks awful. Whereas if you look at the Villeneuve one, they charge at each other with swords while laser guns are going. That is Warhammer 40,000.
Sure.
Why you got a sword? Because I can.
Yeah.
And I will, and I'll hit you with it.
Because as Priestley's saying, it's medieval fantasy in a science fiction sort of jacket.
100%. And it's the same idea, even going down to the houses, the idea of the houses and the baronial sort of makeup of Dune is the Imperium, because the Imperium is just medieval fiefdoms split up across a huge... Instead of being separated by forests, it's separated by space. But a planet is just a planet on its own, doing its own thing, and as long as it sends its 30 bits of gold every year, the king doesn't mind. That's 40k is a medieval setting. You just replaced forest with space.
Yeah.
Instead, it's just weirdos hanging out in far too ornate armor, which is again a hallmark of Lynch in terms of the ornate decoration and the set design. All 40k to the core. Like, it just looks like a 40k setting.
Yeah, because you get stuff like in the actual production design where there'll be really elaborate sort of framing to a door or a hanger on the outside of a spaceship that's kind of got gold leaf sort of intricate designs around the side of this aircraft hangar. And it doesn't need to have that. Nope. And of course, the scale of it would necessitate that to be an enormous undertaking to build that for no reason other than aesthetics. But that does feel very 40k as well.
100%.
Because the scale of it just is like you said before, unknowable. It's inhuman just how big everything is.
Absolutely. Interesting point. If you look at... Sorry, should never say that. You should never say something is interesting. You will find it interesting or not. You'll probably have to edit that bit. Little point, if you look at the cover of Space Crusade, it has incredibly ornate gold artwork all around the side as a border to the box. That's so Dune. Like that art, if you look at that work, that looks like the corners of the Emperor's Palace.
Sure.
Everything like that. It's completely ornate baroque. Just over the top, just no need. And that is Warhammer 40,000. Everything is no need. There's no need to most of Warhammer 40,000. And Dune is the beginning of that, of just this weird... Humanity sends itself on such a spiral of logic that it goes insane, basically.
You mentioned obviously we've got the idea of the mentats, so the like living computers, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I guess 40k's version of that, like you say, is the Mechanicus, and then the servitors, and sort of creating a way for them to be living computers. You don't want AI and artificial intelligence because that's the abomination.
Yes.
But there's other structures within Dune that make their way into 40k as well, aren't they? I mean, the Emperor as well.
Yeah.
And the sort of theocracy. You mentioned the Inquisition and the Bene Gesserit as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Bene Gesserit are a lot more subtle than the Inquisition, although they do have the power to declare effectively exterminatus on a planet. They won't say exterminatus, they'll just do it. Don't trust them, particularly if you play the board game. Don't trust the Bene Gesserit player. But yeah, no, absolutely. To give spoilers to later books, the concept of God Emperor enters. And once we talk about God Emperor, we're talking about 40k, because the central tenet of 40k is there is a maybe dead God Emperor who is keeping humanity effectively repressed, and that's the later Dune books. But they are touched nowhere in the Lynch one, so we should avoid that, really.
Well, I think that obviously is in the books, like you say, and that it's really the books that Rick Priestley is talking about as being the sort of core influence, and whether or not there were, I would say that there's aesthetic influences taken from the Lynch movie.
Definitely.
For later designs, when it came to miniatures, when it came to art.
Yeah.
It feels to me like some of the sculptors, some of the artists were probably watching that movie and going, that's cool, let's do something similar.
I think there's Rogue Trader models and stuff that harken back as well. I can't imagine that when they were sculpting them, because 1984, and then you're talking a couple of years later, you got Rogue Trader, there's no way. If you look at the Starfarers miniatures that came before 40k, they look like Dune figures. Sure. Like, I've got a collection of them, and some of them look like Harkonnen House Troopers, things like that. I think it's definitely, aesthetically, Lynch's Dune is there. I really do. I think, as I say, the artwork and the background and the illustrations of Rogue Trader look like they could be storyboards or something for Lynch's Dune, for sure.
Yeah, I think the God Emperor stuff as well, because there's the Star Child in 40k as well, right? And there's a lot of prophecies floating around in in Dune. There's sort of similarities potentially to be drawn there, and how that sort of comes together.
100%, because the Star Child is the selective breeding program of the Inquisition, trying to get that resurrection of the Emperor. That's the Daleks.
That's a different episode.
I watched Resurrection of the Daleks recently. That's why. They want to rebirth the Emperor through a eugenics program, basically, which is the Bene Gesserit's long plan for the Quidax Haderach. My God, my brain just went there.
Because they are literally trying to engineer the bloodlines, aren't they? In order to get to a place where they can create the Quidax Haderach. Right? This person who's going to do some sort of prophetic thing.
The idea is going to lead humanity to its golden path,
but they don't know what that is, right?
No.
And it turns out to be, well, I mean, obviously spoilers for where things go down the line, but
it's a terrible idea.
It turns out that is true, and they've done it, but it's not what... Sort of a monkey's paw kind of situation.
Yes, it's very much a monkey's paw. They think they've got it with Paul. I don't want to say anything, because I think the next Dune film's going to come out and people might see, but it doesn't go well. It is a warning on following charismatic leaders.
I guess that's another thing that we can probably see in Dune, and we can see in 40K, is that everybody's a good guy and that everyone's doing the right thing all the time, right?
Everyone's a goodie.
Yeah.
It's refreshing to have a science fiction universe where everyone's the good guy.
Sure. Of course, I'm being facetious. Really, there's a lot of bad guys, and as in 40K, the majority, if not everybody, is a bad guy, and people are doing very bad things and justifying the means because of the ends, and that's what we're seeing in Dune. People doing some really terrible stuff in order to achieve whatever their goals are.
Yeah.
And I think that similar sort of outlook, the crossover between Dune and 40K.
It's nihilistic. It's very just like humanity has got itself into a dark place in Dune. It's got itself into an even worse place in Warhammer 40,000. But that idea of a science fiction world where things are just terrible, it wasn't on the screen as much, I would say, in the 80s, because you'd had Star Wars, you'd had Star Trek 1 and 2, I'm not sure on that. But,
in the
80s, Wrath of Khan had come out by then. And so you had quite optimistic science fiction out there. And I think this Dune film sort of came, and it put a lot of people off. Famously, it was kind of hated at the time, because it just, what people didn't know what they were watching, and it was just these weird nobles sort of talking at each other and then stabbing each other, and it was all very...
The pacing is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
There's obviously a lot of complex politics, there's a lot of characters, and people are just doing stuff and talking at each other, and not really cluing in the audience into what's going on.
Not at all.
But if you know what the story is, then actually seeing them do that and just sort of quietly, competently doing that, it is quite interesting still, I think.
Yeah. It's when it first came out, people were given a bit of paper in some cinemas, which sort of explained who people were.
Really?
Yeah, genuinely. I think it was paper, but or it was a sheet of thin plastic or something, apparently. You'll have to find it and put it in the show notes, because it is just like, oh, here's the Baron Harkonnen, but here's also his nephew, and here's his other nephew, and here's his mentor. Oh, don't worry about that mentor. He'll be dead in a minute. And it's just like, what? That's 4 characters to introduce the baddie. Compare that to Darth Vader blowing a hole in a starship and walking in. You go, right, that's the baddie.
But there's definitely more efficiency in Star Wars. I think this was the same year that Search for Spock came out as well.
Really?
So you I don't know where they were in the year,
right?
But you would be getting a very different view of the future, or a future in Search for Spock. But I think and maybe we'll see if there's lessons to be learned about 40K from Star Trek, perhaps.
Maybe,
but there seems more
from Dune. I think definitely more from Dune. We haven't had a pug-armed bard yet model in Warhammer 40,000, unless someone tells me that, with Patrick Stewart charging down the stairway holding a pug, which is one of my favourite moments. Which you're looking at me blankly, so I don't think you've even seen this film.
Because I was really struggling. I thought you meant when you said pug armed, I thought you meant he had literally pug arms.
Pug for arms.
And I'm sure someone must have done that conversion.
Done that, probably. Yeah, that's probably a Delac thing.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick Stewart is in it. He's playing Gurney Halleck, and he's put in a quite Shakespearean performance.
Yes,
and I think that Shakespearean element, I would say there's a lot of Shakespeare in 40K in terms of the way people probably talk and act a lot of the time. Yeah. Space Marines even might.
Yes, the 40k dialogue, when you go to books or the fiction or the even the teleprograms now, which is a strange thing to say, the Warhammer 40,000 teleprograms, it's very very theatrical. Everyone's speaking very rehearsed. It's all very, I will say this thing, and you will say this thing, and then brother, you will say this thing, and I will say this thing, and then we shall have a speech, and then we shall go to war. It's all very, like, it's very, everyone's on show all the time. And Dune's like that, because if you, sorry to say at the end, but if you go in the book, every word that people say is thought about, because everyone can read each other's body languages to an extent that if you say the wrong thing, you're going to get a dagger in the back. And that does come through very well, I think, in the Lynch version, actually, because no one feels natural because they're not. They may look human, but the people you're dealing with, Duke Leto Atreides, yes, you're meant to feel, he's like the most human person in it, Duke Leto. He's the product of thousands of years of aristocracy, of just like learning how to breathe correctly, how to do the correct bow. If you think of Japanese court ritual and how intricate that got, this is that pumped up to 11. This is, you have to make sure your breathing is regulated, make sure your hands are in the correct position. So it being acting it works very well. It is a stage show, and in a way 40k is as well, because there's no one normal in 40k. You cannot be normal in 40k. There is no one normal in 40k. The basic Imperial citizen is not normal, because their life is 18 hours working in the corpse starch factory to go home and pray to the Emperor and then go to bed and then get up again, and that's it, and that's not normal.
The actual the way in which the Imperium works isn't very, we wouldn't recognize it today, really, I don't think.
No.
And I that sort of oddness of behaviors is quite an interesting point. I've not actually thought about that. You mentioned like sort of courtly rituals and that level of artifice that comes with people having to think about every single aspect of their presentation, every single thing that they say, and how they behave can have a lot of ramifications. Yeah. Because it's the sort of political backstabbing is so extreme. Yeah. That is,
and this is Dune and 40k. If you think about anything about the High Lords of Terror, if you piss off the Masters of Assassins because you come to the table a bit late or something, don't drink the tea. you don't. Do
you think that when we think about like terror and the High Lords of Terror and how that would work, you don't always get a view of that side of the 40k universe because there's so much time is spent with the war and the wars that Eternal War. It's all about armed forces fighting across all sorts of places. Do you see there being a sort of Dune-esque political sort of machinations happening on Earth?
Oh god, yeah, all the time. There are a few books. There's the Vaults of Terror books, and a bit of it is touched in the more later Dawn of Fire books, but very little. Absolutely. The Imperium hates itself. This is the thing, the Imperium hates itself. The 12 High Lords, if there's even 12, hate each other. Each department's fighting each other for resources, for piety, for service, just for money, for greed. Yeah, the Imperium doesn't work. To go back to a couple of steps back, you were saying about everyone's a baddie. The Imperium at the top level is working like Hitler's bunker at the end of the Second World War, where they don't know what's going on. They're completely detached, but they want to be the ones that break the Russian army, or they want to be the ones that will turn this war around, And I'm using a real-world example there. You can use any really high-level politics when it gets completely out of touch with reality, and they're still scrabbling in the dirt for being the best, even though the world's falling apart around them. And that's Dune, and that's 40k, because the Imperium's collapsing, but they still want to be the ones that make sure 10,000 Psykers get to the Emperor, not, maybe we should use some of these Psykers to fight the Chaos guys, There's lots of that. Also, to go back to the Marine example, I think what's interesting is if you look at Rogue Trader Marines, I would say they're the Harkonnens. Right. If you look at modern Marines, they're the Atreides. They're not good. They're still fighting on behalf of the bastards, but they're a bit more smartly dressed. Whereas Rogue Trader Marines are very much the Harkonnen, absolute, you want this world destroyed, so you send them in, and they're going to make a mess of everything, and that's fine, because that's what you wanted.
Tell me about the Sardaukar. So these are the Emperor's Royal Guard, right? Yes. And they're supposed to be the best trained warriors in the galaxy, I guess?
Yep, until a certain desert tribe are revealed anyway, but the Sardaukar are the Emperor's shock troopers. They are In the Lynch film, they are mentioned once or twice. I think.
Yeah. They're given an introduction, like a verbal introduction, because the Emperor is very proud, and the Emperor seems more present in the Lynch version than in the Villeneuve version.
Yes,
and he's a bit more aggressive, I think, as well. He's much more a sort of strong, active figurehead in the Lynch version. And he says, "Okay, I'm even gonna send in 5,000 or however many of my Sardaukar."
Yeah,
and then I think you see them around. You don't really see them in action. They're stood around him. Towards the end.
Because the other problem is he says they'll be in Harkonnen livery. So when
does he?
Yeah, so when the Harkonnens are, because they disguise themselves as Harkonnens,
right?
So when they're fighting, you've no clue.
I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, the idea is they're a hidden force,
right?
Because if he shows his going deep door here, if he shows his hand, then the Landsrad will get upset. But blah 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 blah. But the Sardaukar are the shock troopers. They're the terror troops. They are very much the proto Space Marines, because the idea is these are people that have been sent to a prison world, Salusa Secundus. Apologies on pronunciation of any of this, by the way, but also it's not real. And it's effectively a death world, but the death world being it's a prison planet filled with the galaxy's worst people. So only the best are going to survive and become the Sardaukar, which is how the Space Marines effectively become about. They live on awful worlds, and only the best are able to become the Space Marine. It's very similar to that. And then I think it's kind of inferred that even like the prisoners' children will then grow up on Salusa Secundus and then be born into that. Again, like the Space Marine child soldier thing of these are children then given psychoactive drugs and machine guns and said, go on then, off you go. And the Sardaukar are very much of that. They are disappointingly absent in the Lynch film. Sure. I think that is a failing of the Lynch film because you get no sort of... To be honest, I think the military side of the Lynch film is poor.
Well, you don't really... It's not that heavy on action, really. No. There's some quite cool sequences where people are riding on the back of the sandworms and they're shooting.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned there's missing sound effects, but there's also an interesting thing where you have to sort of speak into the gun to make the gun work.
I blanked that out of my head.
Because there's that... I guess that's not from Herbert, then.
No, that's a Lynch.
Right, okay. Because that's like I actually quite like that, where there's some sort of strange thing about the power of words, specifically. Because then even his own name...
Yes, it's a killing word.
Yeah, exactly, which is quite cool.
Yeah, there's a reason it didn't get picked up and put in 40k.
But Psychers did. And because that is another thing that's very present in the Lynch film. Yes. Is everybody whispering to themselves?
Brilliant.
And it's
absolutely
to show that they're thinking, and you get a lot of internal monologues, and everybody sort of does it very, very softly, especially Kyle MacLachlan, who's just like really softly spoken all the time.
It's the De Laurentiis production, isn't it? Same as Waterloo. Sure. If you watch Waterloo and Wellington saying, "But only if I had more French guard."
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how do you show the tension of this moment? Well, I'm going to have someone speak it out loud because I'm going to hear what they're thinking.
I'm really tense right now.
But it works well, I think, in the Lynch film because people can read other people's thoughts.
Yes.
So actually, there's always a danger that somebody is hearing this thought.
I think that as well. And also, they're betraying it by body language again. You know, Lady Jessica can read someone across a room because of how they're breathing. You know, it goes down to that. And the Bene Gesserit, we sort of compared them to the Inquisition before. They are a mix of the Inquisition. They're a mix of the Inquisition and the Assassinorum. They're closer to the Divisio Assassinorum, really, because they're in the shadows and they can just read people. And I think they're an interesting thing that hasn't been explored in 40k, which could be explored more. I think you have touches on it, particularly the Calidus assassin. So you've got Melindy introduced in the Ian Watson fiction. She's of the Calidus Temple, and that's the first time we hear the term Calidus. They are very, very Bene Gesserit in their acts. You know, they blend in. They just are. They are there, and the next thing you know, your neck is snapped. That's very Bene Gesserit. There's less of a political side to them. I think that's something I'd love to see explored. Almost like the Shinobi of Japan, that sort of... Actually, they influence things as well. They're not just a blade in the dark, because that's what the Bene Gesserit are as well. They're influencing religion. They are basically a blend of the Inquisition, the Assassinorum, and the Ministorum all put together. They are like the watchword of the Emperor, basically. Their depiction in the Lynch one, brilliant. That bald head, the sort of alienness of them, excellent. I think
there's a real feel to me of the Jez Goodwin Psychers, the sanctioned Psychers from the 80s, from around the sort of early.
Absolutely.
40K. high collars and sort of big bald heads and all that sort of stuff. And that's obviously then flowed down the line, and we see them even today in certain ranges, especially like Necromunda and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the Rogue Trader Adventurers line, they all look like extras from Dune. And I cannot not believe that's like not deliberate, because people wanted to use those figures for Dune. That's a thing to think about. Is a lot of people use Rogue Trader to play their favourite films out. People wanted it to play stuff like Star Wars. There's a reason there's so much Star Wars in it. There's a reason that Marines are effectively stormtroopers and there's laser swords, and people wanted to just play.
Well, it explicitly says in Rogue Trader we've given you a world to play with, but this is the one we use when we play at home.
Yeah.
You can use it,
yes,
but also you can make up your own and recreate your favourite film.
Yeah, it is that, and I think that's been forgotten in a way. I think people thought 40k was out there to produce 40k, but no, it's just it's like D&D before it just became Forgotten Realms. It's that kind of play your own thing. Speaking of, in Rogue Trader, sorry, I'm in the cave of Jordan Sorcery. I'm looking for a copy of the book. So speaking of Rogue Trader, if, as all good Jordan Sorcery patrons, listeners should do, have their copy of Rogue Trader to hand on their right, and Warhammer Fantasy Battle 3rd edition only on their left. If you turn to page 105, there's the August Flyer, which is just a scratch-built little toy. But if that is not a Dune ornithopter, when I've, there's the influence there. You can immediately see that obviously it was like, let's do that. Let's just do Dune. There's so much in the book that as I say, looks like Dune storyboards, 100%. The picture of 113, there's some Space Marines, they just look like Harkonnens. Like, they're 100%. That baroqueness, that over-the-top equipment, and just nihilism really shines through.
Yeah. Do you think you still see Dune in the sort of current 40k or the current GW games?
Very big question, that.
Because I think that if you take a look at something like Necromunda, you can actually still see, like, the current Necromunda range has so many...
Model-wise, 100%. Oh my God, on an open day when the Deluxe were coming out, I actually spoke to the designers and said, look.
Yeah, sure.
Come on. And they were like,
And Van Sar are wearing still suits.
Yeah.
They're...
Oh, the originals especially. Yeah. Do you remember the 1995 one? They are literally still suit dudes.
Yeah.
Like, with mullets. For some weird reason.
Well, which is exactly what Patrick Stewart's got. He's fully got... He's sort of bald on top, but he's got a mullet.
Does he?
He does, yeah.
Oh, my God. Oh, jeez.
So maybe Van Sar, they're all the Gurneys.
Yeah. I would say yes. I think 100%. I think it's impossible not to. I think, even if not the film itself, we have yet to had a Fade Ralph in his pants a la Sting model.
What a miniature that would make, though.
What a miniature that would make. I think Crooked Dice could get on that.
Maybe they have, to be fair.
They haven't. They haven't. I've looked through. Yeah, come on. Baron's nephew, Sting in his pants, brilliant. I do think it has, particularly Necromunda. We mentioned it earlier at the top of the show. There's a floating Psyker model. It might be for Deluxe
Spiker. Yeah.
I think so. That's the Guild Navigator. Yeah. That, oh my God, all of it is.
There's a bounty hunter that's just like a floating blob.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Right.
That's 100% Lynch's Dune right there. The Hive Nobles, all of it. Yeah, 100%. I think Dune, Lynch, and Villeneuve are going to live in the collective science fiction sort of visual dictionary for a long time because they're good go-tos, both of them. For full disclosure, I don't particularly think the Lynch film's that good.
Really?
Yep. Oh, I've watched it so many times, but it's deeply flawed. But it looks beautiful.
So I think that, this is perhaps a controversial opinion from me here. I think that it's not that dissimilar to the Villeneuve Part 1. Obviously, the special effects of its time, and now we've got a new version that looks so much nicer because it's modern. But I think in terms of how cold and impersonal it is, how sort of, politically everything, it's just there's a lot of plot and not a lot of character.
Yeah.
And you're essentially for 2.5 hours going through this sort of long drawn out political plot. And it works perfectly well, and there's some amazing visuals, and I enjoy both versions. But I don't personally think the newer one is significantly better than the older one.
I think you've been huffing spice. No, I can see there are a couple of bits I think the old one shines over the new one. It gives the passage of time much better.
Sure, I mean, it literally, you get the sense. They say it's 2 years, and you do get a sense. Now, don't get me wrong, the pacing in the earlier one is probably worse.
Yeah.
Besides that point, that 2-year gap, because then all of a sudden everything happens very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And you do just go, okay, then this, and then this, and then this. There's a bit of that in the Villeneuve one, I think. But, yeah, there are strengths to both and weaknesses to both. But on balance, for me, it's
insane. The other one, it's an important film, and it is visually good. I think it misses the whole core of Dune in quite a strong way. In what way? Paul's meant to be charismatic for a start.
You didn't enjoy his whispering thoughts constantly?
No, I enjoy his Long Live the Fighters. That bit's great. But I also enjoy Chalamet's Long Live the Fighters as well. I just think the original is so stilted. So the Baron Harkonnen is such a comedy villain that he's not scary.
I think he's great.
Do you?
Yeah, I think he's really good because he's so grotesque. And I think, just to bring the 40K-ness of it, I think that he fits so well in 40K as a performance.
Right.
I can absolutely see that character existing
as
on
a hive
Necromunda.
noble kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, fair. I don't know. I think it just doesn't jive with what I think of Dune.
Sure.
I think is the issue. So I think when you've got something that's so strong in your own mind and imagination, the Villeneuve one is much closer.
Right.
And I think I just can't. I like Kyle MacLachlan. I feel like I'm ragging on him here. He's excellent. He's just some old dude in the first one. He's not Paul Atreides. He's too old. It's weird.
There is.
Like, what are you doing?
In particular, I mean, I very much enjoyed the duel at the end of the Lynch version.
Okay.
So, it's probably not Sting's greatest work.
Oh, I don't know.
But I really enjoyed his sort of, in that fight, he's very, I will kill him. And he shouts that many times.
Yeah.
I would assume that was borrowed for Man of Steel and General Zod. I will find him. That's just a little Easter egg.
I mean, do you not think Fade Ralph is a complete waste? Like, you don't know who he is.
In the Lynch film, in the Lynch, yes, I think that's fair. I think he's in 2 scenes, maybe.
Yeah, who the hell is this guy?
Yes, but that sequence I do quite like. I like MacLachlan's delivery on Give Him the Emperor's Blade as well.
Okay.
It's like, it's a real... There's a real presence in that scene for MacLachlan that I like. And I thought that was a good duel. I don't know that I think then once that has happened, the Lynch film, then just sort of very suddenly, it takes a 90-degree turn very quickly and then just ends.
Yeah.
And you mentioned before that there's suddenly rain on Arrakis because he's sort of summoned this rain and saved the universe.
And what Lynch does is he makes him God.
Right.
He makes him, for he is the Kwisatz Haderach, and it starts raining and everyone's delivered. Paul Atreides isn't God. This is the key. There's a reason that Herbert had to write a sequel book to be like, guys, you didn't get it. He's not the goodie.
Where does the book end? Where does the Herbert
book ends in the exact same place.
Right.
Exact same place, confronts the Emperor, takes Irulan as his wife, Chani is his concubine kind of thing, which I'll talk about the Villeneuve one is a bit different, but it ends in the same place with Paul taking power because he just says, if you don't give me this play, I'm going to nuke the spice.
And is there still the threat of war?
Yes, the Landsraad all appear, basically, and they're ready to go. And they're about to blow it up, and the Guild are just like, whoa, we need the spice. Like, the Guild override the Emperor, effectively, in the end, because they just say, no, we don't care about you, we care about the spice.
Right.
And if this guy blows up all the spice, we're done. When Lynch makes it rain, that is destroying all the spice because sandworms die in water.
So you don't think there was any plan for Lynch to make a sequel? He was just wrapping things up there.
I think he was wrapping. I don't know if it was his choice, but either them or the producers or someone said, right, wrap this up, make him
We need an ending.
We need an ending because otherwise the ending is just, all right, I'm in charge now.
The Villeneuve one, because obviously the Villeneuve adaptation
Yeah.
of this same story to this point takes place
Yes.
over 2 movies.
Yes.
And his ends in that same place.
Exact
The
same
second
place.
movie ends in
Yes.
this sort of duel with Fayed.
Fade Ralphie. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the sort of the showdown with the Emperor and the Guild.
Yes. And then Paul has taken power.
Mm.
And, then, the Fremen get to see all their new friends across the galaxy. 60 billion of them.
So this is, and I wonder if this is a sort of 40k kind of aspect to it. So rather than sort of save the galaxy, and the prophecy does deliver, and it doesn't save the galaxy through a single act, like causing rain to make a desert planet into a verdant green planet.
Yeah.
He goes on a great crusade, right?
Yeah.
He launches a great crusade.
The Great Crusade, yeah.
So now, and obviously the Emperor in 40k, having done this and sort of taken what he considers to be civilization to the stars.
Yeah.
But that necessitated billions of lives lost.
Yes.
And just almost infinite war on a galactic scale.
Yeah.
And that's where Dune's going.
That's where Dune's going. That's exactly it. That's exactly how it ends, with the jihad starting and Paul and the Black Eagle of Atreides will, for a start, the Eagle of Atreides taking over the galaxy. It's a bad ending. The book ends on a downer. Paul may defeat the Harkonnens, but all Paul did was exploit a native people's religious fervour to get revenge because of this stupid duel that's been happening between his noble house and the other noble house the whole time. It's not good. It's a bad ending. It's sad. And that's, what Dune Messiah is about. And I assume a third film's coming in the Villeneuve trilogy, because that Messiah is a necessary third part to see what happens next.
Right. Which, obviously 40k, it's arguably a setting and not a story. They do move it forward, and it's moved forward a lot more in recent years, and sort of does progress forward into different events happening and the galaxy being torn asunder. Yeah. I wonder if there's ever a place where you could go with the Emperor in 40k achieving the same kind of outcome that Paul Atreides does.
Well, in talking about this, I've come back to something you asked me earlier about, is it seen in modern 40k? And I would say yes. I would say the story of Roboute Guilliman coming back into Warhammer 40,000, this charismatic leader that leads the Imperium to a new golden, age, fighting the Indomitus Crusade. That's very similar to Paul Atreides, because it's not good still. It's still not good. And at the same time, he's back. And the High Lords of Terror don't want him back. They don't like him. And so there is that political backstabbing.
Because he's a threat to their
He's
power.
a threat to them. Could be a fake. Could be a charlatan. Him coming back and saying, there's some really good stuff. I know people hate on Modern Games Workshop, but there's some really good stuff in the more modern books about how he comes back and he's just like, what are you doing? My dad was just my dad. He's not a god. And the Ministorum basically having to take him to one side and going, look, billions of people believe this. And if you say no, we're going to have a civil war here, because, the entire Imperium will schism. So he has to go out and be like, yeah, he is a god, and it's really actually...
because it's the Imperial truth.
Yes.
The Emperor himself was against.
Yeah.
Right? There's a certain aspect of that. I mean, very much in the Villeneuve films, where Paul does not want to be seen as any kind of prophet or messiah, but people take the fact that he doesn't want to be seen that way as more evidence that he is.
Yes.
I suppose that does find its way into
100%. That's the Emperor's story. Yeah, 100%. He's not the messiah, and then he becomes the messiah. And
it's a very naughty boy.
Yeah, boo. Trying to avoid the Monty Python references. But yeah, I don't think there is any way you can deny that Dune, the Lynch film and the whole milieu, is just got... 40k has Dune through its DNA.
Yeah.
There's no... Absolutely not. It's one of the 3 tripods of its tenets. You know what I mean? You'll have to edit that bit. It's one of its core features is Dune.
Yeah.
And I think Lynch's version was in the dialogue at that point, because 1984, as we say, 87 Rogue Trader?
Yep.
3 years. It's in the visual dictionary, definitely. Yeah. People had tapes, so you could even buy the tape of it.
Just on a little bit of a tangent, we've both watched the documentary about Jodorowsky's
Yes,
Dune.
yes.
Do you think there's anything in that kind of wild, artistic interpretation of the Dune universe that you might see floating around in 40K?
There's the artworks of Chris Foss, is it? I can't remember
Right,
his
the
name.
spaceships.
The spaceships. Yeah, them.
Yeah.
I think what you would get from the Jodorowsky's Dune, which on record I'm going to put down here, would have been dreadful. So well and good saying I'm going to do this, but the reality would have been very different, and Mick Jagger would not have been a good choice.
Who was Jagger up for again?
Fade Ralpher.
Right, okay.
I will kill him.
You don't think he could have topped Sting's performance?
I think it's Fade Ralpher. Yeah, because Dali was going to be the Emperor.
Yeah, that's right.
God help us.
God Emperor help.
God Emperor help us. I think what you get there is a very strong influence on Warhammer 40,000, which isn't talked about much for obvious reasons, I think, but it's the drug side of it. I think drugs and alcohol are a huge part of Warhammer. And I don't think many people would deny that, some people who created it would have been under various influences at various points. I'm not saying names or anything, because in case of slander, but, you can read interviews from them talking about it and saying, I think there is a psychedelia that runs through Warhammer 40,000, as Jodorowsky's Dune would have had as well, which the Lynch one does as well. The idea of dreams, the idea of the warp, the idea of heightened emotion, that's all interlinked. And I think Jodorowsky's Dune would have had that a bit more amplified than Lynch, and definitely Villeneuve. But I think 40K has that psychedelia running through it. Yeah. There is the weirdness. There's always the hard sci-fi, and then there's the weirdness.
Well, I think the Eldar maybe could fill that sort of space. And I could almost see the Eldar have... There's some visual similarities with where Eldar in the early days were, and some of the art for Jodorowsky's Dune.
Yeah.
Not that it would have necessarily been available for people to see at the time.
No,
because it's only more recently that it's sort of been out in the open. But maybe there's similar source materials were informing those kinds of designs, those kinds of alien sort of looks and feels. Very
much. There's a glam to it, as in glam rock, and there's a glam rock to Warhammer 40,000.
There is, certainly those early days.
Yeah, down to the goth rockers with the noddy holder hats, but even, it's glam rock. It is the 70s, because you can't take 40K out from where it is, from whenever it comes out or is produced. And I think Jodorowsky's Dune echoes that. You can hear the Magma soundtrack, you can hear the Pink Floyd while you're playing your games of Warhammer 40,000, definitely.
You mentioned that you are not the biggest fan of the Lynch version. Do you like the Villeneuve versions?
I love the Villeneuve version.
And why is that? What do they capture that the others don't?
I think it's holistically way closer to what was in my head than the Lynch version ever will be. I think the cinematography is astounding. I think the model work is amazing. The practical effects are amazing. I think it will stand for a long time. I have some issues with how they adapted, but I think as an adaptation, I think it's 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. There are things you don't learn about. You don't learn about why Dr. Yueh betrays the House Atreides. Doesn't matter. All you need to know is he betrays them, and if you know, you know, and if you don't, does that affect the story? No. It's where the Lynch version falls down in a lot of ways is you have to explain that, so Dr. Yueh's got to have an inner monologue about his wife and stuff like that. You can pick that up, it's fine. Enough is left out that you can fill in the gaps. I don't like how it's condensed in time. That's a tiny problem for me. I just think the visuals of it, and I'm not everything's got to be amazingly CGI, but the visuals of it again are so big and so inhuman. When the Emperor's ship is coming into the planet and the heat shields are burning, and these desert people will have never seen anything like this. This is insane. This is a planet. This is a city-sized starship landing. It's incredible. Shots of things like the Guild Highliner that leads them from Caladan to Arrakis. If you look at the CGI, if you look inside it, you'll notice they've got a different constellation viewed through it because it's literally crossed space. I love the touches like that make it, this is unknowable. This is an impossible world, but somehow it's visually there and it works. And also the Sardaukar are pre-heresy world eaters 100%, down to the same armor color. Like, I've never wanted to collect a World Eater army more than seeing the Sardaukar in the rain covering themselves in blood. Like, that's the most 40K image ever put to film is the Sardaukar in the rain, listening to a priest covering themselves in blood. That is the Space Marine Legion getting ready for war.
I don't disagree that that's very 40K. Yeah. Although I think, and we may well find out in future episodes if there's a particular scene or shot that is more 40K.
Oh my
God! That particular one. I guess we're going to be exploring.
We're going to have to find out. Yeah, each film, which is the most 40K scene. Look forward to when we cover Steel Magnolias.
But yeah, there are some very, very cool visuals in the Villeneuve versions. And one comparison that I had across the two was on Caliban when they are talking, when Duke Leto and his son Paul...
Caliban is the Dark Angels.
Yeah. And also, is there a Lord of the Rings character?
There's a Shakespeare.
There's a Shakespeare character?
Caladan, yeah.
Okay, well, that particular character from within the Dune series, or the planet, it's raining and they're looking out at the sea. And I think you see some ships at one point flying up, and it's just they come out of the water, don't they, in the Villeneuve versions?
Yes.
Those visuals are really great, and I absolutely can see a lot of that sort of stuff on in 40K, where worlds are, because there's so many worlds in the 40K universe. There will be one that's a desert planet, and everything's oriented around that desert technology, versus a planet that's all about rain and seas and stuff like that.
The RPGs explain that very well, actually. If you have a look at stuff like Imperium Maledictum or Wrath and Glory or the Old Dark Heresy Only War ones, you get a lot more variety of planet and powers and like the Imperium, because you don't need to make models for it. It's purely you write it down on a page. But you get submerged hives, you get water hives, you get things like that, which are very Bioshock, actually.
Yeah, which I think is an interesting way to sort of explore the world. Because again, you sometimes see people building their own gaming tables for 40K, and they're doing really heavily themed planets, but you don't really explore those planets that much because of the nature of a miniatures war game. So that makes a lot of sense. But I do think that the RPGs give you that opportunity to get into sort of these odd little corners.
Yeah, absolutely, and you can make your own Arrakis if you want. No one does deserts anymore.
I guess they've had their time, maybe.
Do you think they've had their time? Everyone did snow when 3rd edition 40K dropped, and I hate a snowboard.
Why?
No one's army looks good on it unless you've done snow bases, and no one wants to do snow bases.
Snow bases are one of the best type of base.
If you want to put in the comments what your favourite type of base is, I'm a big fan of Wasteland.
Sure.
Wasteland, the catch-all Wasteland.
Speaking of which, we didn't really touch on the Ash Waste Nomads from Necromunda, who also have a certain Dune-y kind of aesthetic, I think. Yeah,
I think so. I think the Vansar are closer, as you mentioned. I think the Ash Waste are closer to the Villeneuve Fremen than the Lynch Fremen, I would say.
Right.
Do you know, I'm genuinely surprised. I'm going to leap back here. I'm surprised we haven't seen a Imperial Guard regiment in the style of the Harkonnens in their boiler suits, actually, in their sort of hazmat boiler suit kind of thing. I think that'd be a strong look. I seem to remember there was a very small drawing in the Armageddon Codex for 3rd edition, when they did a spread of like 100 different regiments, and I think there was one there, but I'd love to see that as a model kind of thing. Sorry, that was a complete tangent.
No, that sounds very cool. I like the idea of that.
Yeah, the Desert Nomads, I think they're more influenced by sort of other desert things, but the Fremen are so in the mind that you can't avoid that as a comparison, really, can you?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think we've explored the worlds of Lynch and Villeneuve, and to a lesser extent the Herbert sort of Dune, the stories and the interpretations of those tales, and how they have influenced 40K in a lot of different ways. I don't know that we ever got to the deep sort of complete perspective on it, but I think it's just an enormous topic, much like both 40K and the worlds of Dune themselves. You could be talking about it for hours and hours, but alas, we run out of time to spend.
We have. If I could actually give a shout out to a YouTube channel, Quinn's Ideas, which if you are into Dune, I would go give that a watch. He breaks down every book, gives you whole sort of synopsis of each of the books, the 7 originals, and just covers various bits, asks questions like where is Earth and why are these people still here, etc. So that's my shout out if you do want to deep dive into Dune a bit more.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll put that in the show notes and the description down below so people can go and check that out. And we're going to be trying to experiment a few more times with this sort of idea, and we're going to see how we get along and whether or not people are interested in our random musings about different films and how they relate to the various IPs of Games Workshop and how they might have inspired certain creators. So we would love to hear feedback from people about, did this make any sense? Was it of interest? Did you want to listen to more of this kind of thing? Because we've got a long list of really interesting films, and not all films that people would expect. Obviously, Dune is pretty obvious, but we've got a lot of cool stuff in here, various horror films, lots of retro cinema, things that probably don't turn up on lists about Warhammer and 40k movies very often, but I think there's a real scope for us to explore some cool ideas. So hopefully people out there are enjoying it and will leave us some comments and let us know what they liked and what they want to hear more of and what they want to hear less of. But maybe we give a hint, perhaps, about what film we might do next. Rob?
Well, next week, what we're covering, we won't need eyes.
so it will either be that or it will be the Hammer horror Dracula film from 1958. So one of those two, I think.